Hey, do subscribe to the channel before we begin, because what you're about to hear is not a modern gardening trick or internet shortcut. This is, well, an old agricultural force that predates chemical fertilizers by thousands of years, and when I tested it in containers, the results were so dramatic they bordered on unbelievable. You know, ancient worm castings were once considered black gold by farmers who understood soil as a living system, and container growing finally exposes just how powerful they really are. Why worm castings were revered long before modern agriculture explains everything that follows. Ancient farming cultures, from Roman market gardeners to East Asian intensive growers, understood that worms were not pests, but partners. Fields rich in earthworms were fields that produced consistently, even under pressure. What those farmers valued was not the worm itself, but what passed through it. Castings were seen as refined soil, processed through a living system and returned in a form plants could immediately use. What makes ancient-style worm castings fundamentally different from ordinary compost is biology, not nutrients alone. Compost feeds soil over time as it breaks down. Worm castings are already biologically active. They contain beneficial bacteria, enzymes, plant growth hormones, and minerals bound in forms roots can absorb without stress. Ancient farmers did not measure nitrogen or phosphorus. They measured vigor, resilience, and yield, and castings delivered all three. Why container growing reveals the truth so clearly is because containers remove variables. In open ground, soil life can compensate for mistakes. In containers, everything is limited. Root space is fixed, nutrients are quickly depleted, and poor soil shows its flaws fast. When ancient-style worm castings are added to containers, the contrast becomes, well, impossible to ignore. Plants respond with darker leaves, thicker stems, faster recovery from stress, and root systems that fill the pot completely. How I tested worm castings the old way matters. Instead of using modern pelletized or sterilized products, I used castings produced through slow, low-input vermiculture using natural feedstocks similar to what would have existed historically. Kitchen scraps, leaf mold, aged manure, and plant residues were fed over time, not forced. The result was dense, moist castings with a rich, earthy smell that signaled biological life, not just decomposed matter. When incorporated into container soil, the method was simple and restrained, echoing historical restraint. Roughly 10 to 15% of the total soil volume was replaced with worm castings. No additional fertilizers were added, no boosters, no liquids, no synthetic inputs. The soil mix relied on the castings to regulate nutrient availability on their own, as ancient systems did. The plant response was immediate, but not artificial. Growth was not weak and elongated like chemical feeding often produces. Instead, leaves thickened, colour deepened, and internodal spacing tightened. Plants grown this way tolerated heat, mist watering, and transplant shock far better than controls. This is really a hallmark of biologically driven fertility rather than, force-fed growth. Why these results often look fake to modern eyes is because, well, we are used to separating soil health from plant health. Ancient growers never made that distinction. Worm castings improve soil structure at the same time they feed plants. In containers, this means better water retention without waterlogging, improved aeration without compaction, and stable nutrient release that does not spike or crash. A practical application for anyone growing in containers is to treat worm castings as a foundation, not a supplement. Mix them into the soil at planting, then top-dress lightly mid-season if needed. And really, do avoid overuse. You know, ancient farmers really valued balance, not excess. Too many castings can actually create overly rich conditions, and that, in turn, reduces root exploration. Another historically accurate use is casting tea, but not in the modern over-aerated sense. Castings were soaked gently in water to extract microbes and soluble compounds, then applied to soil, not foliage. This approach supports microbial colonization rather than acting as a fertilizer spray. In containers, this can revive tired soil late in the season without disturbing the roots. Why worm castings outperform many commercial inputs over time comes down to feedback loops. Castings encourage microbial populations that continue cycling nutrients even after the initial application. In containers, this means soil improves rather than degrades as the season progresses. There is also, you know, a historical reason castings were used sparingly and consistently rather than heavily and occasionally. Worms were indicators of land health. Their castings were collected as a byproduct of good soil management, not manufactured as a product. This mindset matters today. Castings work best when treated as living material, not as an amendment to overpower soil. What this test ultimately reveals is not that worm castings are magical, but that modern growing methods are often disconnected from biological reality. When soil life is restored, plants behave differently. They grow with structure, resistance, and efficiency that chemical systems struggle to replicate. If this kind of historically grounded, evidence-based farming knowledge matters to you, do consider subscribing to the channel and share this with someone who thinks container growing must rely on constant feeding. Ancient soil logic still works, and when applied carefully, it delivers results that, well, speak for themselves.